We are back. Giants Baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The host of the show is the esteemed Michael Duca. How are you, sir?
Well, I don't know where I'm esteemed, but I accept your introduction. Thank you so much. I am well, Ralph. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. All is well in Alameda, where you formerly resided. And other than we had out on the point, they had a water sewage spill, and people were boiling their water for 2 or 3 days. I think they might still be. That notwithstanding, there's enough radiation out there that a little boiled water won't matter. But that's a story for another day. We're talking Giants baseball. And Michael and I thought we'd entitle this show From Davenport to the Panda. And that means third baseman in Giants history. The first one, of course, was the late, really great as a human being, if not as a ball player. He was good and solid. Jimmy Davenport. He passed away a year or so ago, maybe two by now, and really had an incredible effect on the Giants, history of the Giants in San Francisco, both as a player and as a coach in the organization for many, many years. Managed a year or two under Tom Haller, and he was a terrific guy. What are your memories, Michael Duca, of Jimmy D?
Davvy was just a rock solid defender at third base, and he was a better hitter than most people remember. He came from an era when his competition at third base included Hall of Famer Eddie Matthews, and most third basemen paled by comparison with Matthews, Robinson on either side of the ball there. Davvy was
and there was Boyer, and there was Santo, and Richie Allen. There were a lot of folks in his era. But defensively, I think he stood up to most of them. He was as good as most, and good as any, and better than most.
I think that's a fair and accurate assessment. He was a Southern gentleman, born in Siluria, Alabama. Nickname was Peanut, and I have yet to run across an African American player of that generation who did not love and respect Jim Davenport. The fact that he was a white Southerner of a certain age didn't seem to make the slightest bit of difference. You know, they considered people based on their skill set and their heart a whole lot more than on anything superficial. Probably my favorite Jim Davenport story, Ralph, and one that you'll never hear anywhere else, is that my wife and I were on a trip to Europe right after 9/11, and we were in central Italy, and being a history buff, I had taken her to see the cemetery at Nettuno, which is basically the cemetery based on the invasion at Anzio Beach in 1943, and it turned out that I found out that Nettuno was the home of Italian baseball. It was the first place that Americans introduced the game on a competitive level, and the Italian Baseball League has been around for many, many years. As you know, they now compete in the World Baseball Classic. And they were coached at the time by Jimmy Davenport's son, and the team was in Nettuno. They had a loose relationship with the Cleveland Indians. Every place you went in Nettuno, you saw Indians paraphernalia or Indians logos on people's mailboxes or whatever, because the Indians had donated a lot of equipment to the franchise to help get it going in Italy. And I went to the ballpark in Natuno, seated 4,000 people. It was really interesting. Instead of having fold-down chairs, they had bucket seats, plastic bucket seats were in the stadium. And I wandered down onto the field because I knew a gentleman by the name of Riccardo Schiroli, who was the information officer for the Italian Baseball Federation. And as I'm sitting there watching Gary Davenport work out the Natuno team, I hear off to my side a very familiar voice saying, "Well, Marco Duca, what the hell are you doing here in Italy?" And it was Davvy. He was there visiting his son. He was there visiting his son. Never did lose that Alabama accent. And invited Kelly and I to at the team hotel in Natuno with the entire Italian squad and with his son Gary. So, I have warm and wonderful memories of Jimmy Davenport. He was totally down to earth, and probably is the guy who would have written the book on nice guys.
That's a beautiful description. Would have written the book. There's a Jewish expression. It's called malamed, a teacher of. In other words, if you call somebody a putz malamed, they're a teacher of putzes. They're not just the putz themselves. They're a teacher of putzes. So Davenport is a nice guy malamed. Let's put it that way.
Could we say mensch malamed?
Mensch malamed fits beautifully, and it's a much better headline. Let me ask you this. There has been thought, both with the Giants and Dodgers, moving out in 57, in the winter of 57, that in the year 57, both teams kind of withheld, put the reins on their farm system. Giants had Cepeda, Davvy, that's why this comes to mind, a bunch of guys. Bill White, he went into the Army, came out and was traded. But there were a bunch of guys, young guys, that the Kirklands, the Wagners, those guys, that the Giants deliberately, when they were in New York, Stoneham, deliberately kept them, and include Tom Haller in that, kept them down on the farm, literally and figuratively, just to kind of ease the way for New Yorkers. Well, they weren't doing well, this, that, and the other thing, because that was that 68, not 68, 58. My God, team really set the way for the 62 team that damn near won it all and was truly a powerhouse in the National League for 4 or 5 years down the road, finishing second, albeit most of the time. So,
what's interesting
New York
is
Giants. It's a roundabout question. You think the New York Giants and the San Francisco Giants kind of colluded to come up with a fast start or whatever? Sorry about that.
Well,
that was a terribly worded question.
And
I tell you,
I have to tell you that when they came out here, I was 6 years old. Any of the Stonehams at that point in time, I was just glad they got here. But I do think, I'm vamping for time here while I'm trying to look this up online. I don't think that Tom Haller was in the organization when they were in New York. I think he was some quarterback for Michigan still.
Possible. That's possible,
sorry?
and that might be Illinois rather than Michigan. So
that too, but I'm not positive.
I am on the Illinois thing, but and I'm not. I think he might have been in the minors at that time, but they had, like I say, a tremendous outfield. You lose coming up.
His first year, he played first for the organization at AAA in Phoenix in 1958.
Oh, okay.
And
okay,
what's very
absolutely
interesting
right.
is that then in 1959, he went all the way back to A-ball for a full season. Then came back up to Tacoma in 1960 for AAA for a full season before jumping to the Giants in 61.
Okay. Well, then that kind of negates my argument, or not an argument, but my...
Well, it doesn't. It's just only with Haller. I wanted to be clear about it. I think the other guys you were correct about.
Yeah.
No. But I don't know if there was collusion there to keep the team from performing well or not. I do know that you are very correct about them becoming kind of an odd dynasty in the 1960s. The Giants actually had the best one-loss record in all of baseball in the 1960s. Better than the Yankees, better than the Dodgers, better than the Cardinals. It's just that they kept finishing behind each of those teams. At some point, teams would bounce up in the standings. But for consistently excellent baseball and a great one-loss record, the Giants played better in the 1960s than anybody else.
Yes, and at least you can say they were competitive for all those years, extremely competitive. In mostly a pre-expansion, the first expansion had taken place with the Mets and Houston, but is pre-Montreal and what have you. So it wasn't a watered-down league, and it was a league that took to the African Americans early on, as opposed to the American League, who cut off their own noses despite their faces, and integrated very slowly vis-a-vis the Red Sox, as an example. Speaking of that, the next player I want to talk about is Jim Ray Hart, who came up with a bang. What are your memories of Jim Ray?
Jim Ray Hart is probably the best forgotten player of the Giants San Francisco era. Here's a guy who in 5 consecutive seasons from age 22 to 27 hit 31, 23, 33, 29, and then again 23 home runs. Drove in nearly 80 every season. He dropped to 78 in that last year, but most of those years was knocking on the door of 100, but never quite drove in 100. This was a feared hitter. His OPS plus, which was a stat that didn't exist then, for those 5 years, and anything over 100 is above average. Was 132, 131, 130, 151, and 128. Just an outstanding hitter, a guy whose career ended way too soon. He was moved from the Giants to the Yankees in 1973 at age 31 and played 125 American League games before calling it a career at age 32.
He had some demons.
Yes, he did. He had some issues with alcohol.
Right. I remember reading in a book about how Willie would try to keep him straight. Willie took him under his wing and tried to keep him on track. They had some sort of deal where he'd buy him a good bottle of booze if he didn't drink during the week or whatever. I don't know. But a hell of a hitter. How was he defensively? It was a big drop-off. Anything from Davenport was a drop-off. But was he kind of adequate?
he was an adequate defender. If you look at his career, he broke in, finished second in the rookie of the year balloting, at 18th in the MVP voting his rookie year. 15th his next year, was an All-Star the year after that, finished 17th in the MVP voting the year after that. So he was recognized at the time as being a complete player. He's got like 929 overall, but at third base, but 960 in the outfield. He had a scatter arm. That was what I remember about him. He would make plays and then get up and throw the ball down the right field line. That than it needed to. But he committed 134 errors over the course of his career at third base, which over an 11-year career is not a tremendous number. My recollection is that even had a couple of pretty rough years at third base to start out his career. Richie also, had plenty of issues.
It's a good analogy. They're both the same kind of players in a lot of ways. That's very well put. I gotta say, guy dies at age 50. I think he was 53. I mean, that's all too young. So, rest in peace, Jim Ray Hart. Let's cut to the present, to the Panda. He's back with the Giants, of course. He's been hitting a little bit better in the past week or so. I'm trying to see the light, the good part, the light at the end of the tunnel for this guy. Any chance he's going to return for next year?
Oh, I think he probably gets an invitation to spring training. It really depends on what they're able to do in the off season.
I don't think they'll keep him on the roster. Do you?
I don't think they'll keep him on the protected floor. I think he'll get a minor league invitation. But it's interesting. I mean, if you look at the team, where do they go at third base? They can look to Ryder Jones. Jones has not shown yet that he can hit major league pitching. And at the same time, you have to look at what's coming up on the open marketplace, and I think the Giants are going to have more than a little bit of interest in Mike Moustakas out of Kansas City. That your next third baseman for the next half dozen years, because it's probably going to take a 5-year deal or a 4-year deal with some options. Sign him.
They're going to have some competition from the Mets for that too. What with Wright, his injury problems.
Giants checks clear.
Pardon me?
The Giants checks clear. The Mets.
Is that a Will Ponzi reference?
Yes, it's a Will Ponzi reference. Exactly. It's
as an old Met fan, it slides off anymore. 55 years of this, on one level or another, it's been Will Ponzi for 55 years.
Well, for a while it was you were feeding a lady's obsession for expensive horses.
Right.
And now I think the best quote that I've heard is somebody pointed out last night as the Indians broke the American League record with their 22nd consecutive win on a walk-off hit by former New York Jay Bruce.
Yes.
By the way, the Indians are 31-5 since they acquired him. And
he managed to badmouth the Mets a little bit. I read a blurb somewhere, probably negating the possibility of his return, which pisses me off because he's a very underrated, solid ball player. It's not easy being a Met fan, I'll tell you.
Well, the quote that I read last night, which was not his, it was from someone else, was that he came to a team that has 22 straight wins from a team that had 22 straight injuries.
That's very good. That is some clever writing. Who was that wrote it? Do you remember?
I don't recall. I think it might have even been in a Facebook comment on the situation. But yeah,
that deserves some recognition. That's a great one. Let's talk about the Panda's contribution to those 3 straight World Series. Or not 3 straight, 3 in 5 years, whatever it was.
Well, they won all 3 that they could.
Right.
They won 3 straight that they were involved with.
Right. Which is all you can really ask in this day and age, and it puts a smile on Nancy Finley's face, co-hostess on another show on this network about the A's, who wrote the book about the dynasty that was in the Finley era, and it was 3 straight, and she takes particular pride in the fact that no one has done that since. So,
well, and the reason no one has done that since, Ralph, is that it's too exhausting now. If you go almost 45 days of spring training, and then you go through the grind that is the season, and the multiple layers of postseason that you have now, which did not exist in 1970, 71, 72, 73.
To say nothing of free agency.
And then you go through all of the celebratory that's there now, everything from your mandatory parade to ESPYs to, your winter meetings stuff, and you look at how tiring all of that is, and then you realize that the reason that it didn't bother those A's is that Charlie didn't pay them enough to celebrate.
Good points. Very good points. But again, before free agency, that has made all the difference.
Yes, in both a positive and negative way. The one thing that I remember the most about Panda is standing in the AT&T press box. There's a little secret that people don't know too much about. When you get to postseason, Major League Baseball runs your stadium. The Giants no longer are in charge of AT&T. They have their staff is still there doing all the things that they do, but it's always at the behest of Major League Baseball. And one of the things that Major League Baseball wanted in the Giants press box was they did not want any spare seats moved to the back wall like you have almost all the time during the regular season. And that back wall sometimes is the place you want to be. It's where Orlando Cepeda holds court. It's where the guys who are getting ready to go be on the air for NBC Sports, Comcast, hold court. So that can often be a very interesting place to be. But in the World Series, the security people wanted to be able, and in particular in this instance, the FBI, wanted to be able to see the back wall at all times and see it be clear. They didn't want anybody loitering back there, possibly able to create issues from a security standpoint. And so my job in the 2012 World Series was to make sure nobody stood against the back wall. We could go stand in the offices behind that wall or in the doorways. So I was standing in the doorway with the Detroit Tigers Vice President of Communications for all 3 of Panda's home runs, the first 2 off Justin Verlander. And I have ever seen anybody deflate quite as much, quite as fast as with the second home run that Sandoval hit off of Verlander. It sort of, I think at that moment it sank in with the Detroit brain trust that this was not their year. And,
right. And you witnessed that. It was like witnessing a concession of Robert E. Lee and Grant.
Yeah, I figure it was kind of like Appomattox Courthouse. You're right.
Wow, nice memory of the Panda.
And
of the
collapse
three
on the ground for the last out was pretty amazing too.
Okay, of the three, and this isn't a right or wrong question. It's who is your favorite? Davenport, the three we've talked about: Davenport, Panda, or Jim Ray.
Well, none of those three would be my all-time.
Just as a fan.
But of the three, I would probably say that Panda was the most exciting to watch. This was a kid who, when he came up, told people that he was completely ambidextrous, and then went out and proved it by throwing left-handed from third base and throwing the ball almost 100 miles an hour across the diamond. The stuff that he was able to do, the things that he did coming up as a kid were absolutely of legend. It was a little bit like watching Roy Hobbs out there for a while. But it's the guy we haven't talked about yet who is my all-time favorite third baseman.
Oh.
And that would be Matt Williams. That would be Matt Williams.
That wouldn't have been my guess. My guess would have been Darrell Evans, but that's another.
Well, Darrell Evans.
Another interesting guy we could have.
Yeah, another interesting guy, a guy who firmly believes in UFOs. To the extent that he's certain that he's seen them, Darrell Evans.
Oh, really?
And a guy who went to my arch rival high school. I graduated from Pasadena High, and Darrell Evans went to Muir High School in Pasadena. But another really, really solid guy, nice guy, a very good, solid, steady defensive third baseman. Didn't make very many spectacular plays, but he made all the plays that you needed him to make. And, of course, probably most famous for going on to that 84 Tiger, about 40-5, and setting the then record for the most home runs hit by a 40-year-old, which I think was subsequently passed by Mr. Bonds. But
the Sparks and Henderson run team with Roger Craig as the pitching coach.
Yeah, there were a few connections there, weren't there?
Yeah.
But probably my favorite third baseman of all to watch was Matty. First of all, nobody does a better Babe Ruth impression, and so
he would
you
slide into the mud during rain delays. He would slide into the mud. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, and during rain delays is when he would do his Bambino mime, and he would, it was great because he wouldn't just come up and mime pointing at the bleachers. He would go through the entire setup, the swing, remembering that Ruth was left-handed and Williams was right-handed. And he would do the stiff-legged trot around the bases and the slide at the end, and it was all in good fun, and it was all hilarious, but it was also all showing his respect for the game. This is a guy who probably had the softest hands of any third baseman I've ever seen in my life, and he got them in a most unusual way. His college coach at UNLV strapped ping pong paddles to his hands. They would rubber band ping pong paddles over his palms, no glove, and he'd field ground balls that way. And I'm here to tell you, if you've got flat, hard surfaces sitting in front of you and you're trying to field baseballs that are being hit at 75 or 80 miles an hour, you learn real quick how to soften your hands and how to bring the ball up into your body. And I think Matty was as good at that as anybody I've ever seen play the game. He was a brilliant defensive third baseman who also was deprived by the strike of, I
was just going to say he would have broken the record.
I think he would have broken Maris's record at the time. It was crystal clear. That was the year that he learned how to lay off the curveball low and away. And if you remember, it was sometimes very frustrating to watch him. Trying to get a fastball past Matt Williams was trying to throw a pork chop past a wolf. That's just not going to happen. But curveballs down and away, I cannot tell you how many hundreds of them I saw him flail at, and which caused me to groan at the time. And then all of a sudden, one year, he just got it. It just something clicked, and he stopped fishing for those pitches off the plate and started concentrating on middle in, and just became a wicked dangerous player.
Right. Mike Schmidt had that same problem when he came up, that low and away fastball.
Oh yeah, yeah. That Schmidt's first
198 his first year.
Yeah, I was just going to say he hit sub 200 his rookie year, and everybody talked about what wonderful potential he had coming out of the University of Ohio, but which leads us to perhaps my favorite not very good fielding third baseman for the Giants, the guy who broke all of Schmidt's hitting records at the University of Ohio. You know who I'm talking about?
No.
Bob Brenly.
Oh, Bob Brenly as a third baseman is a little esoteric.
He's a little esoteric, but you got to put him in the pantheon of Giant third basemen, because who else went out and made 3 errors in one game, 2 in one inning, and then went out and hit 2 home runs to win the game?
Was that Brenly, or was that...
Oh, it was definitely Brenly. It was definitely Brenly. It was against the Atlanta Braves, and it was a game that Tom Glavine started. I remember that game quite well because I was stuck in traffic listening to it.
Wasn't that Darrell Evans?
Nope, it was Brenly.
Well, Darrell Evans has some sort of record for making errors in an inning and went on to win that very game with a walk-off, if I'm not mistaken.
That was Bob Brenly. It was the Sunday afternoon. Glavine started that game. It was at Candlestick. As I say, I was stuck in traffic coming home from Santa Cruz, so I listened to the entire game that day. And, other third basemen in the Giants, I mean, if we're going to talk about third basemen, you got to talk about some of the characters out there, too. There was a guy who was not a good third baseman at all, but who went out and played there for a full year for the team because he was asked to. One of the brightest guys, one of the best chess players you'll ever run into in your life. And yet the joke about him was, how are Michael Jackson and Joel Youngblood alike? And the answer was they both wear one glove for no apparent reason.
It wasn't.
I want to say Youngblood came close to 40 errors in one season.
Really? Well, Youngblood was a good Met too. He was both a good Met and a pretty good utility guy with both teams, with the Giants. Didn't realize.
And he's the answer to a trivia question. He's the answer to a trivia question. He's the only player in Major League history to get a hit for 2 different teams on the same day.
That's right. Montreal, the Mets, and then Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
How about Darrell Thomas, one of my favorite human beings in the world, was a pretty good third baseman for the Giants for a little bit, utility guy. Throw his name in there because I watched him manage against a guy named Mel Turner, who later became a coach with the Phillies in Bend, Oregon. And the significance of that game was in the 80s, mind you, it was the first time two blacks had managed against each other in organized baseball. Because when Frank Robinson was a manager, there were no other blacks in the 70s. And he was in Bend, Oregon. I think he was with Bend, and Mel Turner was with Bend. And anyway, I watched him, and my duties as the Topps baseball card representative in the minor leagues.
Well, welcome to modern cellular technology. I dropped off, and I don't know what you just said.
I just babbled away a little bit.
I was asking.
Okay. Let me recap. I was talking about, because this is worth your hearing. It wasn't just babble in this case, believe it or not, like most of my stuff is. But I noted a third baseman in Giant history who is one of my favorite human beings. His name is Darryl Thomas. He was a versatile utility infielder one of those Gil McDougall, Gilliam utility infielders where they play every day. They can just play. They're versatile enough to play different positions. And the gist of what I was saying was that I got to watch Darryl Thomas manage against Mel Turner, who was later a Philadelphia Phillies manager or coach, when they both managed in the minors, and it was Darryl Thomas's it was the first time two blacks had managed against each other in organized baseball. When Frank Robinson managed in the 70s, there were no other black managers that he came up against. So I got to see that in my capacity as the Topps baseball card representative in the minor leagues, and that was the Northwest League, and I got to share that moment with the audience twice. So there you go.
Well, that's a great story, and one of which I was unaware.
Yeah. So it's one of the big moments of my life as a baseball fan.
So where in the Northwest League did this occur?
Bend, Oregon. Where
my son lives in Bend. I've seen the ballpark.
Yeah. I did a video documentary on the Portland Rockies, who had moved from Bend. They were an A team. This was, I think, in 1995. And they broke all attendance records for an Class A team, minor league team, because they played in the AAA stadium in Portland. And the Portland Beavers had moved, and Portland was desperate for baseball. And the Rockies, their farm club, played there, and few players progressed to the majors. None with real no names you'd recognize. Elvis Pena is one of them. You might recognize him. He made the majors for a cup of coffee, but I got to interview coaches and the managers, and it was pretty cool. Oh, and while I talk about that, the manager of the visiting team was a fellow who was named Tom Kochman. And Tom was a friend of mine from doing Topps, and I did an interview with Tom. And his son, who at that time was the 13-year-old bat boy of the visiting Angel Farm team, was named Casey Kochman. And Casey Kochman went on to a stellar, if not spectacular, baseball career, baseball with the Angels. And we had a little cameo appearance by him on camera in my documentary when he was 13. That was pretty cool. And Tom Kochman was terrific. It was just, and the late P.J. Carey, who was the manager of the Rockies, the Portland Rockies, gave me a terrific interview as well. And rest in peace, P.J. Carey. Sorry for the rambling again. This was Tyko rambling. This was really rambling. It wasn't rambling about Darryl Thomas. And the fact that it was 1985 or 87 when all this happened is very sad for mankind, humanity, baseball, call it what you want. Bend, Oregon is beautiful, by the way, where your son lives, huh?
Yeah, it's a lovely part of the state. You're right on the edge of the desert there, but you're right at the foot of the Sisters and
right.
and the backside of the Cascades, and you have year-round skiing available just about 10 miles out of town.
Yeah, I've never been up there in the winter, but in the summers it's absolutely beautiful. And the drive from Eugene, Oregon to Bend is perhaps as terrific as any in history. There's a reservoir where folks camp out, and I did many times over the years that I did tops in the 80s and 90s on that drive. The name of the reservoir escapes me, but it's a come-as-you-are party all the time. And it's kind of cool if you're an old hippie like myself.
Well, I think there are only old hippies anymore.
Well, old and bold hippies, right? But
well, there are no old, bold hippies.
Right. Well, I'm old and ready to fold. How about that? If not bold. Michael, terrific show. I just enjoy chatting with you on doing this on a weekly basis. And if there's anything that we didn't complete, we will, because we got the time, and we'll do it again next week.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for giving me your company, and I'm very appreciative. To those of you out there, simply keep on keeping on. That's what it's all about. We'll be back. Adios, everybody. Thanks, Michael.
All right. Thank you.